Okay, this is the third and final section of Inferno by Aline Miles, a poet's novel, um, where we get heaven, kind of following that whole thing of Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso of the Dante's Divine Comedy. Um, though it's interesting in this section, I'm actually sort of starting to think about Hemingway and um, his memoir, The Movable Feast, which God, I think I've read little bits of and I've heard people talk about as sort of a memoir of a certain certain time of the lost generation. And I think that's coming to mind because of there's sections in here where Aline Miles talks about writing about Hart Crane and going into Hart Crane's life. He, was a poet who committed suicide when he was 32 or 33. Eileen Miles thinks that it is 33, though Wikipedia says it's 32. And then going into his life and into um, a fellow who sort of financed him, Harry Crosby, and the murder suicide with him and his lover, uh, is sort of like really it's like okay, and their suicides apparently being emblematic of the lost generation, and her talking about the 70s and kind of 80s of the poet punk scene, art scene of New York, and thinking about the AIDS pandemic that swept and decimated, especially the gay male population of the time, but also just sort of the hard drugs and drinking, which Eileen Miles definitely indulges has, and they indulge in themselves. Really does is like okay, this is there's reasons why you can get echoes of the lost generation within this sort of novel memoir of the 70s and 80s. It's like I can see why there'd be echoes there. So yeah, let me read some of the many flipped over pages, and then then I'm gonna have to try and edit this down. I do not know uh how Dane does it. Probably he's a lot more selective than I am. That, and it's also just been this book is full of um I think Eileen Miles, they talk about it took him 10 years to write this book, and I can tell that because there's each little section within each little section is a kind of a very kind of nugget of whether it's poetry or thought or memoir. It feels very tightly packed. Like these have been worked, not like overworked, but it's just like it's been compressed and tightly packed. There's so much going on here. I can see it. There's some works that just feel thicker than others. I guess you could have like, it depends on the genre. I mean, you could have a very light, breezy memoir that just kind of trails through a little slice of life and it meanders. This is like super tightly packed. So there's lots to talk about. Starts off with, I notice the Starship Enterprise is often shot from outside, sailing through space with its theme song blaring. Like this is the show, don't worry. In Virgil, when the winds hit, they get in the ship. And that's the story. Maybe the story was also about the fact that Rome was great, but it needed a past. So Virgil wrote it. Um, which, Star Trek. Eileen Miles, Star Trek fan. That warms my heart. Um, there's also that thing of what is Eileen Miles? What is their function in this book? That Rome was great, but it needed a past. And is this America? America was great, but it needed a past as well, and this is what she is writing. She is the poet in this thing. When one poet talks about another poet and what they're doing, it's like, is that what this poet is doing? Maybe. All right. I'm gonna try and be more selective here, which probably means there'll be more pauses. She talks a lot about, poetry and what her poems are, how her poetry process, and just like how the feel of her poems. Um, so she talks about, I could tell when a poem had a little weight. It was real. For me, that weight is about feeling. I'm not an exclusively emotional poet, but I start with a problem and I keep returning to the feeling of it, not the idea. I don't replace it. It seems if you stay in an actual groove, a non-verbal pot, then the poem never really gets lost or boring. Things like that, of just her thoughts on poetry, and I guess what is working for her. um Also, just sort of the culture's idea of poetry. Look at the whole wide look at the whole wide culture's idea of poetry. You'll see this thing, like the absolute worst thing in the world for like the average poetry reviewer, is nonsense. Them making nervous jokes about what they deliberately don't understand. Or the angry ones, holding their heads, oh no, like a virus is taking over my mind. Like it's such a big deal. Minds are always being taken over. Succumb. Don't resist, because we do get to choose what we are succumbing to. We create worlds out of what we put in our heads. I don't know about you. It's why I read. So there's even kind of a wider thing there. There's poetry, but it's also just like what you put in your head, why you read. Yeah, yeah, that's cool. We do get things in here about this Eileen Miles in this book, which, you know, this is the thing is I talked about Eileen Miles wanting to watch her dog kill something, but there's also stuff like, and I am entirely blamed for getting Jana struck out on, and I am entirely to blame for getting Jana strung out and I am entirely to blame for getting Jana strung out on amphetamines. She was a nice lefty when I met her. You know, yeah, yeah. God, I'm gonna have so much fun editing all this together. It'll be an interesting challenge. Will take me hours and hours. There's a thing here about kind of a fellow poet who is like really Alice, who's like into traditional forms. That she was teaching them, and had us doing villanelles and sonnets and a fantoum. And she kept, you know, it was interesting to me that you could feel like that. Though, that what other way did I feel? I mean, she wasn't only about traditional forms, but she was entirely fixated on form, on and on. You had to be thinking about it. That's what poets do, Jan. That's why we were looking at paintings, lifting form from outside of poetry. That's why we had to do it. That's why we had to do what she said. She was the form of Alice. She was putting us through our paces, and obviously, since her own book was called Me to be made, Alice ordered me to be made. She had her. I think that's completely a wash on my part. Whatever point there is there, I will not be able to explain to anyone anyway. So we'll skip. Um, as kind of a note thing here, just on her language in this book, it keeps you kind of unsettled, or it kept me unsettled, because sometimes I can be a very dumb dumb um literalist reader, and I think maybe, depending on what I'm reading, that's easy for me. Everything is very literally done, but then you get somebody like Eileen Miles, and they are a poet, and they are going to make your mind work. And it can be something really simple, such as, one evening I'm lying on my bed, the butch one. And it was like, she does stuff like that, where it's like, the butch one. Are we talking about her being the butch one? It's like the clause, the butch one is right beside my bed, so it's, I guess it's a butch bed. But how does a bed be butch? Um, and she's rattling she's rattling my cage. I'm sure there's a lot of readers out there who would laugh at that, just something as simple as that, rattling my cage. But it does, and it's continually throughout this book, and it kind of it kind of shakes me up a little bit, which I definitely enjoy about the book. Sometimes the language is very staccato. Other times it's just more kind of naturalistic. She varies her modes. She varies her modes. Um, and there's definitely the emphasis here of how this is a book about. This is a Roman, I guess. This is somebody who is there. This is them coming through something, from being a very young woman, not sure what they're going to do, to trying to be a poet, to being a poet, and also be someone who, I guess, starts out, just in the mold of, I'm straight because that's what everything around me has told me to be, who is working out what they are, and it isn't being straight. I don't know if that they would call themselves a lesbian. There's a lot of things through the book where, they'll talk about themselves as like a gay man or something like that. But you get stuff like, I was so imperfect. You know how in your late 20s, the nice things happening. You know how I was so imperfect. You know how in your late 20s, the nice thing happening is you begin to actually enter the world, and you begin to make a philosophy about it. Earlier, 24, I had decided it would be okay to kill myself. At 27, it was okay to live. Everything was pathetic, and it wouldn't stop. I'm a mess. And I could show how that looked. I resigned myself to continuous movement. I'm like a drawing. Like, if there is a form, it exists independent of me, or else I'm complicit in it. I'm wandering in it, underlying, changing horses all the time, and each decision left a mark. So yeah, I'm a drawing, a continuous movement. That kind of that feel, and again, there's that choppy language, which is kind of almost like note taking. Like we're moving along with her as it's happening to her, even though this is something that is definitely told in retrospect. Um, we'll also get these paragraphs where there'll just be odd interjections in the midst of them. It's like talking about just being out in the somewhere. Um, my and then I'm she's out for a walk. It's like my daily walk as planned. It simply turned me into a dyke. I just needed some place to go. And this morning out the window was Mary, the mother of Christ. I had a cemetery out my window, and there was nothing but trees. But suddenly it's October, and I'm falling for Rose. I'm in love with a woman. I explained, looking into the eyes of a statue of the Creator's mother, or the Creator of herself. It was all so stark, and I was losing weight like crazy. I felt like I was dying, but I began talking to Mary, and I told her about my love. October takes everything as usual, and I was pulling on my clothes, and it seemed like the clouds were laughing at me. In their majesty, gleaming beauty, I had always felt kind of tough, but now I was just a faggot. That was it. I felt like a gay man. I didn't feel any stronger being a lesbian. I felt weak. Look at me, God, I cried out. It's kind of like, um, it is a poet's novel because it uses that kind of a poem's logic of images, of bouncing off the language, where you're sort of discombobulated, like, where the hell am I in this paragraph? You know, it's like, I'm the leaves were gone. I'm out for a walk, but then suddenly I'm looking out I'm out the window, and then I'm in a cemetery, and then you're bouncing all over the place. But there's an emotional kind of a thing there that you actually do get from the poem. The poem being, just, this is all blocks of prose, but it's very much prose poetry in how these paragraphs are constructed, and the very kind of raw, visceral, kind of fluidity of being of this Eileen Miles on the page. Uh, Probably skip all the stuff about clits and cooches and stuff like that. Um, but for all the kind of statico and kind of discombobulation, you'll get in the middle of stuff of just, of her having sex with this woman, and um, even after she had one of her outrageous sunset orgasms, which she details while still basking in its immense succulent corona, slowly, with an utter generous and female smile on her face, a satisfied smile and kind, she urges me to put my finger on her secret fingertip and feel the blood pumping as the pleasure is ebbing away. It's like, it's really gorgeous, and it's really intimate, and it's really sexy. Yeah, yeah. And this is where I think we get into stuff where you think, is this like a movable feast? Because she does have tales to tell, and one of them is being at a poetry reading, with it's someone like Oldenburg reading his writing. Who cares? Jane, and she does name Jane. This is Jane, Jane Ockerbach, sits in front of me and puts her hand through the back opening of her director chair. She turns at a slight angle to the reading and places her hand on my thigh and leaves it there for like 45 minutes. Why? There definitely is tales. There are tales in here. Um, Sometimes the tales are kind of like, oh, like, okay, some woman put her hand on my thigh in the middle of a poetry reading. And there's other tales which are just like kind of all the interscene, just, people being people in small groups, and the jockeying, and just kind of all the kind of the stuff that you think, oh, this shouldn't be in poetry. It's like, poets are so totally people too. And all the bullshit that happens in other walks of life happens here, maybe even more so, especially if there's all the drugs and alcohol involved. Um, Here's a little thing that, her talking about autobiography. It is easy to write an autobiography if the absence in the story is me. I remember applying to art school in 1967, staying up late, and I saw my reflection in the black glass of the night. When a mirror becomes a It is easy to write an autobiography if the absence in the story is me. I remember applying to art school in 1967, staying up late, and I saw my reflection in the black glass of the night. When a mirror becomes a keep on doing it. When a window becomes a mirror. It is easy to write an autobiography if the absence in the story is me. I remember applying to art school in 1967, staying up late, and I saw my reflection in the black glass of the night. When a window becomes a mirror, who do I think I am, sitting here now, deeper in that life? There's that idea of being the absence in the story that there's that, but also, but when a window, you're trying to look out on your life, but it becomes a mirror and you're reflecting it back on yourself. There's that idea. You think the thing of like, a writer is a writer is looking out and recording what they see, in a way, recording it, but it is also a mirror, because they are also writing what they see, or their own reflection is what gets conjured up in the writing, which is an interesting thing of this memoir, which is also kind of a document of a particular time, which she's only got her own perspective there, and maybe slightly warped by how much she is in the picture or not in the picture. How cold it was to be up all night, alone, thinking about a woman, while the morning turned blue. I was burning. It was like I took a bolt of lightning and stabbed the world. I was still shaking from the attack. What is the Yeah, there is that thing in this work, is you'll follow along one thing, you'll suddenly skip to another thing, and then you'll go back to the first thing again. Um, so you think like, oh, we got this, but then it's sort of, you're kind of weaving all these different experiences and times together, because a person's memory, it's like, it's not like this happened and then this happened and then this happened, that like all lead directly to a line. You don't get the messiness of life. It's like this happened and then something else way over here happened, but then something back with that happened again, and then this happened and then that happened and this happened, oh, and then we go back to this again at the end. Eileen Myles, definitely, they are organizing, they're disorganizing their memoir in a way to try and kind of give you a taste of what it is like, what it was like to live that or experience that, as much as you can. Uh, yeah, there is a whole thing here on Hart Crane. Um, yeah, is there anything here on Hart Crane? He was a great poet of love. Hart produced in a flicker the blue veins he spied in a lover's breast. His twists of attention made your breath go still. To him poetry was film, even lighter, watching a man's hands grow, not quite thingified, but resonant, meditative. You got there by looking long, all that looking compressed in a poem. He published his first in poetry, came to New York, and got a job in advertising through a friend of his dad's. And that young, 18 or 19, Hart was already a total drunk. At work they gave him the perfume account because he was a poet, i.e. fag, leaving open vials on his desk to inspire the young homo who stumbled in sick in his dirty shirt and shoving the disgusting shit out of the window by his desk, ending that. Um, and like mixed in with this, you get her at a giant party in Tribeca in 1982 and bumping into Robert De Niro. I was tripping my brains out. It was bright. I said, "You are Robert De Niro, the actor." He smiled sweetly, waiting. "I am Eileen Myles, the poet." His smile got even better, and about 1,000,000 women swarmed him. Yeah. And then we kind of go back to her reacting to Hart Crane's poetry. The bridge at Estador, and a line, um, But some are twisted in the love, but some are twisted with the love of things irreconcilable. The slanting moon with the slanting hill. And she that line really gets her. Twisted by love of things twisted by love of things irreconcilable. That was it. That was being gay for me. The slant moon with the slanting hill. The line just never undid itself. It's unbelievable, and every time it ripples in the exact same light, like the moon falling on those coats in the attic, the ocean, not far away, you could hear it. Um, but you also get the sense of her kinship with Hart, like she talks about her probably her heavy drinking, and to write the piece, I took a ton of amphetamine. I had a doctor in Queens, yet I was a drug coward, too afraid to go days on end. I'd go 3 or 4, live sleepless and sad, accomplishing rote kinds of work in bursts of energy. Cleaning the house, it was really ridiculous. The very thing I took it for, to write, was in fact entirely sabotaged by the drug. I was like a needle at the final cut of a record, just perched there, skipping. Yeah, so she takes it for that, but it doesn't work. But yeah, and then bouncing back and forth from that to all the stuff about Hart, and then quoting Hart at the very end. He wrote his mother staunchly about the this trip that he took out to Staten Island when it was much more of nature. I've never felt as encouraged or as free as I have never felt as encouraged, as free or as clean. Think of me often as such, or not at all, for I hope you will understand me. You know, there is something about that of the time that she is talking about, of you get that sense of her never feeling as encouraged, free, or as clean. You know, that idea of like she hopes you will that they hope you will understand me. I think is something that's coming out in this work. Um, there's a thing here about all the people in this book are real people. It's Rene Ricard, a poet, and also somebody who seems to have been a big kind of promoter of discoverer of artists. And he was making me look like a fool. He introduced me to someone once as Eileen, who writes these really hot, sexy poems about drinking beer and lying in bed. It's interesting when you get that outside perspective from somebody, and they just you write sexy poems about drinking beer and hot sexy poems about drinking beer and lying in bed, which it's always interesting when you get an outside perspective, and it can kind of deflate you, even if you were more. And then we get to the very, very last pages of the book, which, it's one of those things of like, I think it's the greatest compliment you can have is it's like, oh, I need to read that again. Here, I'm just going to read the final page. I guess I can clip out what I need. Over the years, I discovered it was always good to go. I have a hard time knowing what to do about leaving. I'd feel I was ready, and yet I was too embarrassed to draw attention to myself by saying goodbye. So I'd wait, or leave with Tom or someone. This is leaving a party. Sometimes I just escape, not saying a word. I tried to get over it, but it never got any better. I think poetry is like a party, because it has to end. You got to leave eventually. Tom knew. I asked why he left so abruptly. "I tell ya, E," he said, being manly, miming his father. "No, I guess it's him. When I walk into a room, I take a deep breath, and when that breath is gone, I have to go. There's nothing left. The thing is, when you're writing a poem, no matter what you meant to say or do, when the leaving impulses comes, just finish your line and get the hell out of the room. Though sometimes, even if you said too much, you can still go back and fix it. You can actually learn to have grace, and that's heaven." And that is the final bit of Inferno by Eileen Miles. Um, I guess I will go through all my quotes and edit it down, and then I'll come back here and try and sound thoughtful, try and do my sum up. I'll have like an hour and a half of quotes to wade through, but probably most of it will be me stumbling over my words. I'll just chop all those out, and we'll see what we have left. We'll see what we have left and what that makes me want to say. All right, more videos later. God, it'll be interesting to see how I can just, if I can compress down and eliminate and hone and hone and hone, and get down to like a 5 or 10 minute review video, that I won't get sued for copyright infringement for having read all of her book out. Having read all their book out. I'm gonna have good challenge for myself. Good, thank you, Eileen, for making me think about pronouns. Awesome. I do mean it, though. I do mean it. It's a great gift that people can give you when it's like, hey, stop thinking that way, or hey, not stop thinking that way, but hey, think a different way, and just how much it makes your mind work is always great. All right, I will leave it there. More videos later.